Hello everyone. I'm in the process of needing to repot this orchid, and I've also been seeing a lot of videos with people's orchids and terrestrial plants that are overpotted. Now, I want to talk about why this is so important and why we need to make sure that we have the right size pot for our orchid. The first thing is that if you overpot your orchid, and that just means using a pot that is too big, that's what overpotting means. There are going to be some terms in here that may be new to some of you. The first reason is that the mix will stay wet too long, and this will prevent air from getting into the roots. And since most orchids are epiphytes, they need a lot of air movement to the roots. Air exchange, I mean. Another reason is that if you've got pests, little bugs, they can get into way bigger populations before you notice that they're there. So you could get like a huge pest outbreak in your grow area, and whereas if you had a little pot and there were pests in there, they wouldn't get to such high numbers. And the last reason is that it's just a waste of money. You'll use way more mix than you'll need. Beginners may think that it would be good to have a little plant in a great big pot so that they won't have to repot as often, but that's counterproductive for the reasons that I mentioned before. Also, if your mix is staying wet too long, it's going to break down faster and you're going to actually have to repot more often. So, the general rule for choosing a pot size for sympodial orchids, these are ones that grow a new growth to the side each year or multiples a year. How do we choose? How do we know? Well, there's a couple things you want to look at. The general rule is to have a pot that's going to allow for 1 to 2 years root or top growth. And the other rule is to choose a pot that is just big enough to contain the root ball. However, this root ball, as you can see, is smaller than the top growth. So, the first thing, I'm so sorry, I'm a little confused and my dog wants in, but if she comes in, she's going to be all noisy and begging for treats. So, how do we know what 1 to 2 years growth is going to be on this orchid? As you can see, this orchid is growing. It's got a new growth here, it's got a new growth here, it's got a new growth over here, and it's growing them from all around. So this can potentially get quite a bit bigger in 1 to 2 years. However, this one is stunted, and the new growths that are coming out are little. Like, let me find it. This one here, this is really tiny compared to this is how big they should be. So it's going to take a little bit of time for them to get back to full growth. This has been stunted because of insect damage, and this is not my fault, by the way. Not my orchid originally. So what I'm going to do, okay, wait. This was in about a 2.5, 3-inch pot. If I went up to the next pot size, just one pot size up, you can see I don't have room for the top growth. The roots are going to grow outside the pot, and also I've got quite a bit of space in there, and that would, I don't know, I think that would just be kind of a lot too much mix. If I go way up to where it should be to give me enough growth, or room for growth, then I would have a huge amount of space in here for the root ball. Alright, hang on. Get my dog. Come on, baby. So, the other thing that most people don't talk about is the shape of the pot. Now, this was in a pretty straight pot, straight up and down. So, I don't know, so it seems like, I don't know, this is just not going to work. Like, I'm going to have way too much mix in there and not enough room for top growth. So I have chosen a pot with angled sides, this clay pot. So when I take this, like the root ball is going to just fit, the base of the root ball is just going to fit in the bottom of the pot. That's just about the same size. But then when I put it in here, I'm going to have room for the new growths to come out. And with this particular one, I'm just potting it up. I'm not actually repotting and putting in all fresh mix. That will be a separate video about why that is. But I have some other examples that would be different when you're choosing a different pot. Like, right, stop, please. Okay, this is a Cattleya Skinneri. Skinneri? Heidi Jacobs. This plant has a huge amount of spaces between the growths. It's got a really long rhizome between the growths. Alright, I'm going to have to come back and do a part 2. Sorry about that, you guys. I gotta take care of the dog. Okay, welcome back to part 2 of how to choose a correct pot size. As I was saying, there's a lot of space between the rhizomes on this orchid, and it is also growing 2 leads at a time. This doesn't just grow 1 at a time. So if I choose a pot that is going to have room for 2 years growth, that's going to be, let's see, if we've got 1, 2, maybe 2, 3, I'd need about 4 inches bigger, and that is just not, if I put that much mix in with the root ball, the size of the root ball is, I'd have a huge amount of space, I'd have too much mix, I wouldn't get enough air exchange, and my roots would die. So what when you get to about 6, 7, 8 inch pots, you're going to have to start changing your potting methods. But with this one, this is about a 5 or a 6 inch pot. And what I did when this lead started to grow roots is I just set it down in this 8 inch pot, because this is all I had at the time. And I just left a lot of airspace, and I tossed some packing peanuts in there and a bit of moss around the tops of the roots so that they can have some moisture. I don't know, they're having a little problem though, and I've never had this before, but I think that'll pick up now that I got the moss in there. I just put moss in 2 days ago. So I've been having a real tough time finding orchid supplies in my town lately. We live in a little town and it's winter and they don't have all the garden supply stuff out. So for if you've got a plant that has a long distance between pseudobulbs, you're going to want to use a big, flat, shallow pan. And I'll show you one of those in just a minute. Now, another example I have is this little Cattleya. It makes 1 growth a year. Let me get this out of the way. And I have, this has been in this same pot for about 2 years, I think. It came in this size pot. Now it's got room for probably 3 or 4 more growths because it has a really compact habit. It's got, let me see if I can show you. The pseudobulbs grow really close together, so it has quite a bit of space. Now, since this is technically overpotted when you think about the general rules, because it's got more space and the roots, I don't know, there's a good root ball in there, but typically this would be considered overpotted, except I have what's called a 4-inch pot rule. If you've got a plant in a 3.5, 4-inch pot, it's pretty much safely overpotted because the pot is small enough that it'll get a lot of air exchange. The problem with like having an orchid with not that many roots in a big pot, as I said before, is it stays wet too long because there's no roots to absorb the water and your lack of air exchange. So once you get to a 7-inch pot, you've got to start potting differently, and I'll do that when potting for specimen plants. That'll be a separate video. But this one, so this one's perfectly fine in its pot, overpotted, because it's in a 4-inch or smaller pot. Technically, this could be in about a 2-inch pot that I think is about 2 inches, and it could have been in there for 2 years or so, because it just had. This was the growth that was the lead growth when I got it. So, let's see, 4-inch pot rule. Right, I think that is everything I wanted to talk about that. So, for the big plants, specimen plants, plants with a lot of space between the growths, this is the kind of pot that you're going to want. This is quite short. It's also clay, and that will help with the air exchange and drying out faster. This is a bulb pan, and I think they're also called azalea pots. I think azalea pots are short and squat like this as well. And this is, I think this is a 10-inch. No, this is an 8.5-inch. So that plastic must be a 7-inch one. But this Cattleya skinneri is going to go in this pot as soon as the next growth starts to root. So this is, or I don't know, if I could just pot it on, maybe. Anyway, okay, so I think that is everything about pot size. The next videos will be what kind of pots to choose, how some orchid pots can be very dangerous. I'll have a video about how to safely overpot your orchids, and how to pot specimen-sized orchids as well. That kind of goes in with the how to safely overpot. So I hope everyone sticks around and watches the other videos. Please subscribe if you like this and give it a thumbs up. Thanks.